They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there.
We don't need to go populist left or populist right. We don't need to embrace neo-Marxism or neo-fascism, these disastrous movements from the 20th century. Turns out the answer is pretty much our Bill of Rights, our story. Embrace freedom. That's the answer.
And if the LP has a purpose, it's not to put people to sleep. It's to wake them up.
We're here because we love liberty, and we're here because we hate injustice. We are here to save mankind. We are here to fight.
Join us, the Libertarian Party, in perhaps the most exciting, grandest endeavor in history, the restoration of American liberty.
Ideas spread, they can't stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.
Hello and welcome to episode 67 of Decentralized Revolution, a podcast from the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus and Mises PAC. I'm Aaron Harris and I'm your host. My guest today is Jenin Younes. She's made a name for herself as the lefty lockdown skeptic on Twitter. And much like our last guest in episode 66, Carliborisenko, Jenin's political roots are on the left. And when she started publicly questioning something that today's left in America are doing, in this case, the COVID response, she was not received warmly by those on that side of things and faced some consequences for that, socially at the very least. But Jenin has a different set of skills than Carlin does. She's got a different approach. She's a civil liberties attorney with experience as a public defender. So she hasn't been started a podcast like Carlin. She has been doing a lot of writing like Carlin is. And she's working in the courts. She's filing lawsuits and doing other things like that in the courts to fight the government COVID tyranny that we're all dealing with. And in addition to, really killing it on Twitter, I encourage you to follow her on there. We're going to get into a lot of stuff here, and I hope you enjoy our talk. Welcome to Decentralized Revolution. I really appreciate you coming on. And I'd like just to start, I became aware of you on Twitter as the lefty lockdown skeptic. Tell us who you are and a little bit of your background professionally and politically, leading up to what started last March.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Aaron. So I am currently an attorney at the new Civil Liberties Alliance in Washington, D.C. I had been a public defender in New York for about 9 years. I started in 2012, so 8 years in 2020. I was leaned left. I had a slight libertarian streak, especially when it came to free speech issues and criminal justice issues. And sometimes I differed from some of the other leftists around me on those topics. But for the most part, I was pretty left. However, when COVID happened and the government started, New York City, especially where I was living, started to shut down businesses and prevent kids from going to school and, telling people to stay in their homes and wear masks, I was quite horrified by that. I thought that this was significant government overreach, and I had trouble understanding why the people around me didn't see it that way. I thought to me, in my opinion, it's a huge violation of people's civil liberties to tell them they have to stay home and they can't leave their homes and they can't socialize. These things are crucial to our well-being as human beings. And, for prolonged periods of time, I don't think that the government should have the right to tell people to do that. So I started to Google, and I didn't know anyone else who saw things the way that I do, not one other person. So I started to Google, and I came across people like Alex Barrington and Jeffrey Tucker, who I'm sure you're familiar with, yep. And so what they were saying. And I was like, okay, I'm not completely crazy. There are other people out there. They don't share my politics. There are other people out there saying similar things. I started to do a lot of research, and I recognized, came to learn that what the New York Times and similar left-leaning media was saying, that this is sort of the way things are done. When there's a pandemic, we lock everything down and we force people to stay in their homes, was actually not true, right. And not very effective. And I looked a lot at Sweden, which, for people who don't know, did a sort of, they didn't really lock down. They asked people to voluntarily socially distance and take certain precautions. and their numbers were not really worse than New York's or other places. And then they didn't have to violate people's civil liberties this way.
So were you already at the New Civil Liberties Alliance? When did you start there?
No, I started there this past April. So
okay. So you were still a public defender when COVID started?
Yes, I was a public defender. And then, so I was there for another year, but at some point actually, so I started a Twitter account in September of 2020. I actually was up at AIR in Great Barrington where I was writing for them. And this was a couple weeks before the Great Barrington Declaration was written. Martin Kulldorff was there, Jeffrey Tucker, and I hated social media. I was not on it. So but they were like, you have to start a Twitter account. So I wasn't expecting anything to come of it. I'm sorry. Do you want me to turn my phone off? I realized it keeps making noise.
Oh, if you want to turn it off, that's fine. No big deal. We're not too super formal here. So,
sorry.
I'll say something. I think it's interesting. I was going to maybe ask you about it toward the end about you being a public defender, but I think it kind of gets at something that I was actually just talking about with my last guest. I recorded with her yesterday. So the previous episode to this one is Carliborisenko. Do you know her?
No, I don't.
Okay, so I'll send you the info about her. But basically, she's an organizational psychologist who came from the left, got sort of disaffected with the left during the first Trump term, and I guess now only Trump term. So during Trump's term, and then she got involved with the walkaway movement from the Democratic Party. She likewise was not really on social media in a political way. She wrote an article. She went to a Trump rally in New Hampshire and basically said, hey, these people aren't as bad as you might think. Just a very mild sort of, hey, maybe we should, listen to these other people instead of demonizing them. She put that up on Medium and apparently it went viral, and she got an instant sort of backlash from her friends, family, colleagues, and was, basically cut off by them. Just again, almost immediately. And she said nothing, she didn't come out and say, we need to build a wall, just merely being curious. And that gets to one of the things that I talk about a lot, and people are probably tired of hearing me say it if they listen to all these episodes, but I was born in 1975. The left in my lifetime has really, really changed. My political science professors in the early to mid 90s were all they were civil liberties. They were free speech. They were wanted to protect the rights of the little guy. They were wrong on economics, in my opinion, but even some of them were good on guns, seeing guns as a civil liberty. And then over the last 25, 30 years, you went from, the ACLU used to kind of pick a lot of fights that, conservatives would kind of laugh at, but they really were defending, really doing great work defending free speech. And not even they seem to be doing that. So as someone who came from the left and, you had these natural reactions to, hey, the government telling people to stay in their houses for indefinitely and other. So how do we get to the point where the left doesn't see that as a problem?
Wow, that's an excellent question. There's a lot there. I am very disillusioned with the left, whatever I don't think, I'm shocked by them. I don't think they care about civil liberties at all. I don't even know what you would call it anymore. I certainly don't call it liberalism. It has there's no resemblance to classical liberalism, which I think I would describe myself more as a classical liberal at this point. There's very little respect for individual rights. They've adopted this. Some people like Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times claim that we're caricaturing them. But we're not. They're ridiculous. Their obsession with pronouns and wokeness, and they're so obsessed with race that they're actually racist. I witnessed insane things at the public defender's office, including I was persecuted, I would say, for not refusing to adopt the position that we should hire any Black candidate. And I thought we should actually consider people's qualifications.
Oh, so you were basically saying don't hire every single black person who puts in a resume.
Exactly. Like, we have to actually look at people's qualifications. And if, race isn't the only factor here. I'm not even opposed to considering it among other factors. But it's become so extreme. So reaching these people, I don't know. I think there's a contingent that's probably unreachable. They think I'm crazy and horrible, and I see things they say about me. I see things my old colleagues say about me. I don't think there's anything that I can say to these people. But I will say that as time has gone on over the past year and a half, I've heard from more and more and more people on the left, even and some people, former colleagues or people I went to law school with. Actually, someone I went to law school with reached out to me yesterday and said something like, "Oh my God, I thought I was the only person." It's so great to see other people on the left. And I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal the other day he had read, and he was like very happy. So I do think that as they get crazier, more people are coming around.
And this is kind of a little sidetrack, but I used to be a newspaper reporter in basically suburban Ohio. And I was always fascinated by the fact that, the prosecutor's office was, very well appointed, had lots and lots of people. And then literally like in a building, like across the parking lot was like the little shed that they put the public defender people in. And I was kind of went into that. I was kind of bopping back and forth between libertarian and conservative. And that really solidified me as a libertarian for good in seeing how much power prosecutors have and how little power the little guy does have. And like, again, I would think the left would be, let's just say the fact that the left is now championing the FBI and the CIA is like deeply shocking to me. Yeah. So what was your experience like working with the judgment of the prosecutors and what they're motivated by?
Well, prosecutors, the prosecutors in New York weren't awful. You hear these horror stories. I think a lot of those take place more in the South. There were a lot of honorable prosecutors that I dealt with, but they are motivated to obtain convictions. And I did see some, withholding evidence, that's called a Brady violation, a lot of misconduct where the prosecutor says things in summation that are just completely, improper. I will say, I do think the system in New York where I worked was not, it really wasn't as bad as some of the other states, I think, that you hear about.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. That maybe that's another topic for another time. I have a lot of questions about maybe how we could reform all that.
Another aspect of my experience that I think isn't necessarily indicative was that I was actually an appellate public defender. So I did appeals, and I did only serious crimes. So I'm not sure, a lot of the abuse of discretion, I think you see, it comes into play when we're prosecuting people for drug possession, etc. I mostly did very serious felonies, rape, murder, child molestation. So I think I had a different.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Then, I think a lot of times, like with the drug cases, and the, petty theft and stuff, they kind of overcharge. So they'll plead out and Right. So, all right. Well,
go ahead. Sorry.
We'll get back to what's in your wheelhouse. And so what was your frame of mind? Now let me say this. Where are we at right now with the vaccine mandates? I think everybody is a little bit heartened by some of these states filing lawsuits. And I've heard recently of a couple of decisions, talk about, the propriety of that mandate, what Biden was kind of trying to do, and what's the status of that right now?
Sure. So Biden has the mandate it's sort of several mandates. There's a federal employees mandate where people who are employed by the federal government have to get the vaccine. Me and a colleague and I filed a case in the Southern District of Texas challenging that mandate last Friday. We also asked for a temporary restraining order. So we haven't gotten a decision on that, but we're hoping to hear soon. There's also the OSHA mandate, which applies to, so basically the Biden administration is trying to force private businesses to implement their own vaccine mandates if they have over 100 employees. I think this is highly controversial, in a court also in the Fifth Circuit in Louisiana granted a temporary restraining order there, or a stay, and said there are serious, grave constitutional concerns here, because what you have is the federal government trying to use private companies to accomplish what it can't, and that's prohibited. That's like very clear in the case law. I mean, essentially Biden wants to force everyone to get the vaccine, but he knows he can't do that because the federal government doesn't have police power. So he's trying to instrumentalize private companies. And I think that this will be struck down. There's been a temporary stay, and then hopefully that will become more permanent. The other reason I think it's not legal is that they use the OSHA statute to do this, but the OSHA statute is about workplace conditions. It was really about, came out of this fire in the early 1900s in a warehouse, so it's not about disease mitigation. And once we allow this, where does it end? I mean, should our employers be able to tell us, we have to take vitamin D so we're less likely to get a cold because we could infect other workers? I mean, and then the other aspect is there's a contractor's mandate. So this really, this is influencing a lot of people. And some of the earlier mandates were the university ones. The landscape wasn't looking very good. There were a lot of losses, including one of my cases at the preliminary injunction stage. But I'm heartened to see that there are some better decisions coming. And then I think the new frontier is child mandates, the 5 to 11 age group.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the difference between, the federal government maybe not having certain powers, but, we've heard, what's going on in like New York City. I have a friend in Los Angeles who's, terrified by, she's afraid to get the vaccine, but it's going to be very, very hard for her to function out there. Have there been legal challenges that have been successful at that state, county, municipal level, or do those entities have more power to do something like that? How do we attack that?
So I think what you're talking about is the difference between sort of employer mandates and then these passport programs, which New York City also has when you have to show a vaccine card basically to go into any place of public accommodation. There haven't been a lot of challenges so far, which has surprised me. I think that there are good arguments to be made, and I'm sort of looking into that myself. Cuomo had implemented a passport program in the spring, and I had done some work. I was sort of planning to file something, but then he actually did away with it because COVID rates went way down. And then de Blasio started a new one, which I've been looking at more. I mean, what they keep doing is renewing their emergency powers and then issuing these mandates. So I think there's, an argument to be made that there's not really an emergency. They shouldn't just be allowed to keep saying there's an emergency. I'm extending my emergency powers, and now I'm going to have this vaccine passport program. But I think there should be challenges. I think there are a lot of legal problems. It's part of what's going on, I think, with all of it. It's a little hard to frame the issues legally because I don't think that we haven't really experienced anything like this before. And I don't think that the framers of the Constitution anticipated anything like this. So I don't think it should be tolerated, but I think sometimes it's a little hard to figure out exactly how to do that from a legal perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, it is pretty complicated. One thing that I've been shocked about was the fact that a lot of these, both the vaccine passports and the mandates and even like company policy, that a lot of people, there's no exceptions, or it's like very, very hard to get an exception. And that's just one thing that I was just kind of blown away by of, people valuing the opinions of their fellow man so little that I want you to take this no matter, even if you think it's going to harm you, or even if it's against your, religious values or something like that. That's another thing that I was not optimistic about the whole, liberty versus security thing before COVID. Like, I knew that a lot of people, they like to comply, they want security, and they're not comfortable with freedom. But I was just kind of really shocked, especially, after those first few weeks, that once we figured out that, this wasn't going to be like an apocalypse, and then people still, the irrationality of it, and people wanting to be told what to do and wanting to tell other people what to do and not caring what they have to say has just been shocking and depressing to me, frankly.
I feel exactly the same way, and I think you hit on a number of important things. So actually, all of the lawsuits I've brought have been on behalf of people who have natural immunity, not because I'm okay with other mandates, but I think it's the strongest way to start, because you can, the CDC is trying to make it look as though the science isn't settled, but the science is settled. The real science is settled, that natural immunity is as good or better than these vaccines, more robust and durable. And so for instance, this person didn't end up becoming a client, but I talked to a doctor in Rhode Island who has natural immunity, and he had Bell's palsy recently, and Bell's palsy is actually one of the side effects of the vaccine. He has very robust natural immunity, and he runs his own practice. Rhode Island suspended his medical license for not getting the vaccine. And, I think you put it very well, that there's this lack of trust in our fellow human beings. Most of the people who don't want to get this vaccine have good reasons. They've thought it through. I think the majority actually have natural immunity. And, a lot of them are the doctors and nurses who are on the front lines during this, who we called heroes, and now we're firing them from their jobs because they don't want to get an unnecessary medical procedure. And it's this bizarre, I think a lot of people, as you said, sort of feel more comfortable if the government just says, everybody get the vaccine. And there's a real question about whether these vaccines stop transmission. They seem to be effective at reducing severe symptoms, but if they don't reduce transmission, and I don't think that the government has established that they do, there's no justification for mandates. And I heard a statistic actually on Bill Maher the other day. 0.01% of people who have been vaccinated end up hospitalized with COVID. 0.01, that's a tiny chance. So if you have the vaccine, you really shouldn't be worried about other people. It's just not your business.
Right. And that's the thing for me, is that I think that all of this, both the vaccines with the mask mandates and the people wearing masks, I went to met a fellow libertarian friend of mine was in from out of town in the old city here in Knoxville today, and walking down the street, there was a guy with two of his friends, and the guy had a mask on, and I just was like, outdoors, like, why are people? And I think I've figured out that it is performative, right? Like, if this guy was really that afraid of getting something, like, why would he have just walked out of a restaurant, right? If you're that, like, some of these people probably are hypochondriacs or whatever, but I again, and this is a good segue into your adventures on Twitter, is the complete lack of familiarity with logic, or the weird arguments people make for vaccines and masks and things like that. And if you show them one thing that, challenges one argument, they'll, I never said that, now I'm saying this, so I don't get on Twitter that often. Most of what I see on Twitter is other people posting it on Facebook, and I try to not be on Facebook that much, but the times I have gone onto Twitter, like, it's a snake pit. So what has that been like for somebody who wasn't really on social media, to having debates and trying to use facts to argue something very important in that environment? What have you learned, not only about the COVID stuff, but just about, how people are communicating these days?
Oh, well, yeah, social media, it's very interesting. I mean, when I started the account, I didn't expect anything to come of it. I was like, okay, Martin and Jeffrey are telling me to start this. And I now have 40,000 followers, which I got in just over a year. So I've ended up sort of having a relatively big account, where it's kind of weird to think, like, anything that pops into my head and I say, which I do at some frequency, gets a huge audience. I think a lot of people don't follow me who disagree with me or don't engage. I think they probably think I'm too crazy, because I think, so people like Monica Gandhi, Vinay Prasad, who are a little bit more in the center on this issue, they get a lot of vitriol. They actually get it from both sides. But I think to most people, on the left, I'm just completely crazy and lost. And so I don't think they engage with me that much. But I mean, it is interesting that no matter what you say or do, I mean, people tear you apart. It's, I wrote this op-ed that was in the Wall Street Journal the other day about why mandating vaccines for 5 to 11-year-olds is illegal and immoral. And in my opinion, it's illegal and immoral for adults too. But I think children, especially because they face such a low risk and because the vaccines have been tested on them even less, it's sort of the illegality and immorality are even more stark. So I wanted to write something about that in particular. And people attacked me for, you don't care about adult mandates. Like, I just brought 3 lawsuits on behalf of adults. So, it's a cesspool. People are just looking to attack other people, and it's difficult now.
And again, another thing that shocks me again about the left, and I think I've given up on, the left, being good on the stuff it used to be good on. I mean, even the wars, right? Like, I'm ashamed to say that I was for the Iraq War at the beginning, and by the end, by 2008 or so, I came back around to the libertarian thing. But at least there were huge, for young people who weren't around then, there were huge, like 1 million people in Chicago at like an anti-war rally, and they were all leftist, right? So like the left isn't even good on that anymore. And the aspect of the COVID thing that I think is really, it's funny, but it's also just sad, is that it's been a massive transfer of wealth and privilege. The older you are, the richer you are, the whiter you are, the better off you've been through COVID, right? So it's basically to protect the people who are most vulnerable are people over 70, right? So we've ruined everybody's life to protect everybody over 70. We've shut down businesses, small businesses, and Walmart and Amazon have gotten, everybody still bought from them. And it's just right in front of your eyes. The vaccine mandates passports and mandates are disproportionately affecting blacks and other minorities. But again, the left just, they don't care. And it's just, I'm speechless. I'm speechless.
Me too. And I think, my conclusion after 1.5 years of this now is just that they're hypocrites. So actually the first piece I wrote in September of 2020 was called What's Gone Wrong with Left Liberalism and Lockdowns or something. And I sort of detailed all the ways in which this was harming poor working class people in other countries. One statistic that I thought, when left liberals hear this, that's going to change their minds, obviously. 130 million additional people are facing starvation around the world because of lockdown, supply chain disruptions. That should be the end of the story. These are, and you can tout the statistics of people who died of COVID, and every death, of course, is a tragedy in its own way. But for the most part, they're older people who've had the chance to live their lives, whereas the people who are facing starvation level death by starvation are primarily younger people in foreign countries. And it's an open and shut to me that they don't actually care. Otherwise, there's no way they would let this happen. And, another point you made, a lot of my parents, my friends' parents, their lives didn't really change. My parents are, my father's an academic, my mother's a computer programmer. They work from home anyway. They don't have, they're married. They mostly stay at home. They don't travel that much. They don't depend for their happiness. They don't depend on socializing. Young people depend on socializing, dating, and going out with their friends. And traveling, and they get their, people get their happiness in different ways at different stages in their lives. And then, not to mention the fact, if you're sort of middle class, upper middle class, you can do your job from Zoom, but people who work at restaurants weren't getting their paychecks. And I also heard people say ridiculous things like the government should just pay everyone to stay home for 2 years. I'm really sorry. If the government pays everyone to stay home for 2 years, who do you think is cooking your takeout? Right. Who do you think is bringing you your takeout? Who do you think is operating the grocery stores? This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, I've got a story that one of my close friends who he lives in Northern Virginia. This happened to his next door neighbor. His next door neighbor was a waiter at a fairly upscale restaurant in Northern Virginia and was making a very good living at it. He lived next door to my friend with the gentleman who was a waiter, his father and his 2 children. The mother had run away and left him with the kids. This guy apparently had some problems with alcohol, but had kind of had those under control, was making a good living, supporting his children along with his father, helping him, and things were going good. COVID came, he lost his job because the restaurant shut down, and within months he had drank himself to death, whether it was intentional or not. And, you know, that's another thing. You know, there are things like that that are tragic, small businesses, you know, people losing businesses, things like, you know, people who, I think I saw a billboard, something about don't miss your checkup for cancer or whatever. And I'm thinking, well, you know, that a lot of people did and still probably are because of that. I went, I broke a tooth in the middle of March last year. I had to wait 3 weeks before my dentist would see me. And that's a very minor thing. But if I had cancer and I couldn't go in to get a screening, or, you know, and, you know, it's 3 months later they found the cancer. Oh, sorry, now it's stage 4, you know.
Well, then that's being borne out. This isn't just speculative. The hospitals are now, I just read an article saying the hospitals are flooded with people who had health problems that went too long because of all of this.
Yeah. So have you looked at any, as far as challenges, like you mentioned earlier, the health doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers that, you know, obviously by this point, again, if you use your brain, like if you've been a nurse in a hospital for the last 18 months and you haven't, you know, you've probably gotten COVID and you probably had an asymptomatic case and you're probably fine. And they're firing these people anyway. Like, do those people have there been any successful legal challenges to that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of at the moment. It was pretty bleak for a while, except for religious exemption cases. Those were the only ones that were winning. Not the natural immunity cases or any of the other vaccine mandate cases. There was a case in Chicago, I think last week, where a judge, I believe, issued a temporary restraining order and observed that, you know, if I think it was on cops in Chicago, if you're under such pressure to get the vaccine that you do it to keep your job, then that's irreparable harm, which we've had some trouble. Some of the judges have been unwilling to accept our contention that it's irreparable harm if people are under such pressure to get the vaccine. Yeah. So that was good. And then there was the Fifth Circuit stay last week, or I think over the weekend.
Yeah. And I don't know how much expertise or what opinions you have in this area, but another aspect of this that I found very troubling. And again, I'm old enough. A lot of other people who are involved in the Mises Caucus are a lot younger. But I remember in the late 90s, you know, when the internet first started, you know, people started getting the internet in their houses. Like the big fear was, oh, you can be totally anonymous online, and you know what's going, you know, this is this Wild West or whatever. You know, fast forward 20 years, basically. It's almost the opposite, that you can't, it's been very, very difficult for people to even debate and talk about things online about this. Like, I know if you mention the names of certain drugs and stuff on certain Facebook or other platforms, they're censoring and stuff like that. And as a libertarian, I would say, hey, if you're a truly private company, anybody, you know, you can kick anybody out of your house for saying something wrong. So you should be able to kick anybody off your website. Do you think and again, I'm not trying to push you into any particular position, but it seems to me that that this isn't just, you know, Facebook coming and thinking this is out of their public duty to crack down on misinformation. It seems like a very concerted effort between the government and big tech to push everybody into, oh, the vaccine is the only way to fight this thing.
Yeah, I actually have a pretty strong opinion on that. And I had a couple of videos censored. One interview with Megyn Kelly got YouTube on our channel, not on Megyn Kelly's channel, got censored for taken down for medical misinformation. We were just talking about mandates. I didn't talk about the vaccine itself or the vaccines themselves. But I think that you're right. I mean, we had it was Psaki, redhead. I forgot how to pronounce her name.
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it either because I don't watch the news. But Jen Psaki or whatever.
I read it, but so she was basically saying that the government is telling these private companies to censor this information. So at that point, I don't think you can call it private action.
Right.
And we do have a problem apart from that, where these, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, they control the public discourse. They control what people believe. And so for them to be, I don't think that the framers of the Constitution obviously had no concept of Twitter in 1776. So I think we have a problem that I'm not sure our laws are able to deal with. And of course you can say, well, you can start Rumble and et cetera. But you do have a sort of realistic problem where it's not very easy to start a huge social media platform, and people tend to just go with what they know. So yeah, we have a huge problem.
and there's also, and again, I'm a writer and an editor with degrees in political science and journalism, so I don't know how any of this works. But like you have to have your web hosting somewhere, and I know there's a company called Fake Mask. They were at fakemask.com, and they're these masks that are basically which I have a couple of them. But
I do too.
Yeah, I don't even use those. About 3 months ago, I was like, I'm not even wearing that anymore. I'm done. I missed going to see Bob Dylan last night in Knoxville because they had a mask mandate. I'm like, of all people, I'm not going to sit there and listen to Bob Dylan, with a mask on. He's all about free thinking, and I'm not going to do this. But this company I know they've been they're like a gypsy now all over the internet because some Twitter mob gets them kicked off of this this hosting company or whatever. And so again, like if it's totally private, I am totally fine with people policing their own front yard, so to speak. But I think that there really is, and it's difficult. So I don't think the solution is for the government to regulate the internet and let's have a national council that decides what's fair. Like I think some conservatives sometimes they kind of make a little bit of that argument. So that's not the solution. Yeah. But as people who believe in liberty, like I don't really know how if the main way we communicate, it's as if, again, to use the founding fathers, it's as if there were, two companies that made the equipment to make printing presses with, and one company that made all the ink, and the government leaning on those places like, oh, we don't want you to sell to this guy from Virginia, it's very, so I think that the one thing I think that we can be sure of is that it's just a private company argument. In most of these cases with big tech is not exactly accurate. I don't know what to do about it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very difficult. I don't see an easy solution. I mean, another thing is that the government is playing a role in my opinion, the government is misinforming the public. They're misinforming them on natural immunity, on masks, et cetera. So the government is playing a role in spreading this misinformation, ironically, while they're accusing us of doing it. And so that it is more government action than I think some people would have you believe.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because even people, mom and pop stores, down here in Knoxville, nobody, mom and pop places, nobody, employees aren't wearing masks. But like at, Kroger and Starbucks and places like that, they're still mandated by the companies to wear masks. But even, again, I think that if the whole thing about are masks effective and all that, it is influenced so heavily by government misinformation, government, implied threats that, I don't fault any business trying to keep its doors open. But again, I just don't, some blue-pilled libertarians have kind of made the argument, hey, we can't tell these people what to do. It's like, well, first of all, I can disagree with whatever they do. But second of all, if someone is being sort of coerced and lied to into making this decision, then that's not an entirely pure, decision on their part. So I think it's appropriate, to push back on that publicly. So.
Right. And to the extent, the public is sort of demanding mask mandates, at least in many blue jurisdictions. I mean, that's also based on misinformation. Rochelle Walensky said the other day that masks were 80% effective, at least at stopping COVID. That's absurd. Nobody thinks that. And I think the citation was it was completely wrong. It was about like how many droplets it catches, which is the mask catch. I think that's what it was. I mean, these people are just blatantly lying. And
so let's maybe try to talk about a couple positive things. You mentioned the Great Barrington Declaration earlier, and since you've dove into this, when did you start your Twitter account? You told me, but I forgot.
Right, it was around Labor Day. It was my first visit to Great Barrington.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what you mentioned Jeff Tucker and the people on the Great Barrington Declaration. Where do you go for news about this stuff? You have to cherry pick, go here and there, but what good things have you discovered? What good people, outlets, all that, where you are able to get some truth and good perspective about all this?
I mean, it's quite sad, but I have to say Twitter. I mean, and at least, there are accounts I trust. So Martin Kulldorff, one of the Great Barrington authors, Jay Bhattacharya, they have good Twitter accounts when it comes to the science. There's another doctor I like, Mahesh Shenoy. He has a less large account, but he's very good. And they dissect the information. They'll also explain why a lot of the studies that the CDC claims show X actually don't show X. Like the CDC recently had one saying that vaccine immunity was 5 times better than natural immunity. It was complete garbage study. It didn't actually show what they claimed it showed. So these people are very good at dissecting it. I still read the New York Times, but mostly to explain why they're lying, why there are so many logical lapses, etc. So sort of just various accounts, really. I don't think, I think Newsweek has had some good articles, The Federalist, The Nation, but I don't feel like I have a single source. I used to really trust the New York Times, and I don't anymore. And the Wall Street Journal has some good op-eds and opinion pieces, but their newsroom is pretty bad. I don't think it's any better than the New York Times. So I don't feel like I have one, and then the Washington Post is horrendous, of course. I don't have like one go-to anymore.
Yeah. So that's the thing. You have to kind of hunt for it. And I think you have to kind of trust your internal BS detector. And, I'm not saying you're a libertarian, but I'm saying as libertarians, I don't want to, but as libertarians, the libertarians I know, like sometimes that BS detector is turned up almost to a fault. I went to Northwestern for journalism school, have a master's, did that for a few years, decided, I totally made a mistake going into this field. And so literally, I don't believe any narrative that they're pushing. And I think that a lot of places like the New York Times, very seldom do they outright tell a fact wrong. It's two things. It's one, they misinterpret a study or throw a false light on a quote or a study or something like that, or it's the stuff that they don't cover. So it's anything that doesn't fit the narrative they leave out, or if they have to report on it, the headline is going to make it seem a little worse than it's going to make it seem different from what actually was said. And so I don't believe anything that I hear, people talking about that they got from whatever. If I want to find something about it, I go, you have to do it back in school, your history teacher is like, oh, you got to have 3 different sources, right? You got to go check these different places and see if they match up. And, most people don't do that. And, most normal people, they just want to turn on the news and find out what happens. And, but I think hopefully more and more people are waking up to this. And it's really encouraging to me because I have a lot of friends who are not, I kind of grew up a Reagan Democrat household, and I'm a libertarian, but a lot of my friends in the past have not been, and always love it when I talk to people with different backgrounds who kind of come to some of the same realizations. I feel like, hey, maybe I'm not the only crazy one here. So,
yeah.
Tell me, I'll let you go here in a few minutes, but I want to talk a little bit more about the new Civil Liberties Alliance. When did that get started, and what else are you guys doing? And is it meant to be kind of a like, again, what the ACLU maybe used to be or could be?
Yeah.
Fill us in on that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was started in 2017, I think, or 18 by Philip Hamburger. I was the founder. He's a professor at Columbia Law School. And their core mission is to fight against administrative overreach, so especially agencies. Although we do executives, general executive stuff too. And we're nonpartisan, non-political. We're seeking to be what the ACLU is supposed to be before they just became overtaken by a basically extreme leftist ideology. Right. So, there are a range of cases, and it's sort of attorneys have different interests. So it's frequently based on, what a particular attorney wants to bring. But for instance, we have one attorney who does a lot of SEC cases. So where the SEC is the defendant, we're suing the SEC. And then we did a number of eviction moratorium cases. That was the government was saying that you couldn't evict people during COVID. And, this sounds great, but there are a lot of mom and pop landlords who are really harmed by these laws and a lot of tenants who are taking advantage. And this just was, the federal government, the CDC doesn't have the authority to do this. It's crazy. So those were a set of interesting cases. We've done a couple of free speech ones. My colleague actually just argued a case in the Third Circuit yesterday. It was interesting about a tweet by Ben Domenech about he was going to send to the salt mines and it was versus the NLRB. So they were the defendant. And then we've done a lot of COVID related litigation. Well, the eviction moratorium, stuff was also COVID related. So we've done some vaccine mandate cases. And then before I joined, there were a couple of cases challenging business closures.
Okay. So once, hopefully, let's assume that 2 years from now, things go well and the COVID thing is not a problem anymore. What kind of stuff would you like to be working on there at where you're doing? What in a normal world, what would you be working on?
That's a good question. You're so much more optimistic, I assume, or well, some other crisis. Or
yeah, this is definitely a hypothetical. I'm black-pilled for the short term on this, but
I really am interested in free speech issues, so I would be pursuing some of those cases. There are also some other group of cases we brought are Title IX cases where typically professors are getting fired for supposedly, sexual harassment, et cetera. But at a lot of these universities, they're not given any due process. So we had a client who was accused of rape or something, some sort of sexual assault. I actually forgot the exact allegations, but during the time the woman said it happened, it was someone he'd had a relationship with, and my take on the case was that she regretted things, she was angry about how it ended, and so she fabricated this. But during the time period she said it happened, he was out of the country, but he wasn't even allowed to submit evidence to contest it because they didn't give him any right to a hearing. So these are cases that also interest me. I would, if I wasn't spending all my time on vaccine mandates, I would be doing that.
Jenin, why do you not believe all women?
Because some women lie.
Yeah. Everybody lies. It's only a matter of when and what about. I guess I lied. There's one other quick thing I want to talk about. One of the things that two things that we're doing with the Mises Caucus. One is we're trying to sort of take back the Libertarian Party and have it be actually libertarian and run well. The other two things are, local initiatives and issues coalitions. Like we helped with Decriminalized Denver, which I think was last spring, like spring of 2020, where they, legalized mushrooms in Denver. So we're trying to find places like that where local, counties, or cities will say, hey, we're going to defy the federal government on drugs and we're going to legalize this thing, or, on Second Amendment stuff or whatever, to try to use those, nullification of federal laws or state laws further up. And then we're trying to run local candidates, in some of those places who believe in that nullification principle. And, the one thing I think, again, I've kind of heartened about is all of these states that have filed. It's the OSHA thing they've been filing the lawsuits against, right? That's the most common one. So, I really think that, decentralization is kind of the way to go, and try to encourage. I think the best way for this to possibly end up in a good way is like with a national divorce, like California can be its own thing and all of this. I guess, that's our agenda. So I guess I'm trying to find a question of, from a legal perspective, what do you think of that on fighting COVID and other things? And what type of stuff should we be thinking about as far as what we can do legally at the local level to increase liberty on, whatever the issue is, whether it's COVID or guns or free speech or whatever?
Well, yeah, I have to say this whole thing has made me really become much more critical of the idea of big government. And I am becoming very sympathetic to the idea of, states' rights and, more should be done at this level. It doesn't make sense for basically Rochelle Walensky to be making policy for the entire country, which is essentially what's happening. So, people need to bring lawsuits. People need to challenge this kind of overreach. And it's also, it's important to pick the right courts. If you go to, the DC circuit is horrible. You'll just create bad law. If you go to the Second Circuit, it depends what it is, but you're probably on a lot of these issues, you're going to create bad law. So, lawyers have to be strategic about where they're bringing cases. And then, once you create bad law, it's harder and harder to get a good decision because there are more and more cases against you. Of course, while I am sympathetic to this idea, it's unfortunate for me from a personal standpoint because I live in DC, which is just horrendous on all this stuff. So, but.
Well, I've been, you're not the first one, but I've been encouraging everybody on the podcast and elsewhere to come to Tennessee. My wife and I moved down here at the end of March from Ohio. There's no income tax down here. My mayor is Glenn Jacobs. Do you know who he is?
Heard of him.
So he used to be a professional wrestler by the name of Kane, and he was apparently very popular and successful. And he's bigger than I am, and I'm pretty big. But he's the mayor of Knox County, and he is full on. He's a Republican. He runs as a Republican, but he's full on libertarian on everything. He's great. They haven't raised taxes in this county. In the city is different. In the county for 25 years, and it's great. A lot of people are going to Florida, which is good too. Yeah. But unfortunately, but also fortunately, I think it is encouraging that people are, taking matters into their own hands and doing something to improve their lives. And I think that I hope it's a good thing that, the people who are moving to Tennessee and Texas and Florida and places like that are not going to bring with them the stuff that they're fleeing, but again, just a common sense thing. I love California. My sister has family out there. I love being out there, but I could never live there. And there's no reason why someone in California should want to have the same, government as I have here in Knox County, Tennessee, or vice versa. So, and I think that, if you let one person make a decision for everybody, that's a recipe for disaster. And I think that's what we're seeing on the COVID thing. And hopefully this will encourage people, not that, we hate California, we hate New York, but, we can still be friends and maybe not be, joined at the hip anymore. So.
Yeah, and then there's the possibility of voting these people out. We saw what happened in Virginia a couple weeks ago, last week. And I mean, blue Virginia went red because people, I mean, it's, very attributable to the nonsense that's happening in schools and also,
Well, let's talk about that real quick. And I promise you this will be the last one because I've got work to do too. And I'm sure you do. The thing where Merrick Garland, America's 10th Justice, who's running the Justice Department, sent out the memo that the FBI is going to look at people at the school board level, people who go to school board meetings, parents. Like what are some legal issues, legal strategies parents should be using, not only on the COVID stuff, but the CRT stuff and the Title IX. I don't know if it applies to high schools, but some of that stuff, the federal regulations does kind of come down to that level. And parents who just want normal schools, like are you seeing any legal strategies that people are using to try and forestall some of the crazy stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, getting elected on your school board is probably one of the best things you can do. There was a proposal to sort of tie funding, federal funding, to teaching certain aspects of critical race theory. The term, I know it's more complicated than whatever, but teaching Kendies, whatever. That was actually retracted. We wrote a comment actually, and we weren't taking a position on the substance, but the federal government isn't supposed to be directing local districts in terms of the content of what they teach. So if these things are coming from the federal government, I think those are challenges that can and should be brought. But when it comes to the curriculum of schools, I mean, I don't think you can do very much except for try to get elected or try to get people you like elected.
Yeah. And then there's also the hopefully the school choice. I'm a little skeptical of some of the school choice stuff because I think that like vouchers may eventually bring government regulation with it. But I'm heartened by the fact that so many people are taking their kids out of public schools and homeschooling and things like that. So if anything, COVID, I think it has showed us how many people are not interested in liberty and not interested in respecting their fellow man. But it's also, it's a growing minority, I think, of people who are, not going to put up with this stuff, and they're making changes to hopefully protect themselves and their families. So hopefully that'll have a positive effect. So I'll let you plug what you're doing, how people can engage with you, and so go ahead. Sure. I'll put links to all this stuff up on the show notes page. You said you just had the Wall Street Journal piece, so you can talk about recent stuff and where people can find out more.
Yeah, I just had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that was came out in yesterday's print called "Forced Vaccination of Young Children." I actually forgot how they ended the title. Right. And I'm on Twitter under my name, and also my handle is Lefty Lockdowns 1, which is a long story. That was when I didn't understand Twitter, and I was Lefty Lockdown skeptic, and I cut it off for the handle, and now I'm stuck with it because I'm worried about ruining the account. And then I work at New Civil Liberties Alliance. That's nclalegal.org, and we are a nonprofit, so we rely on donors. So if you like what we're doing and you can contribute, that's much appreciated.
Yeah. I wonder, do you guys, I don't know if anybody's listening who might want to intern there or something like that. Do you guys do things like that? Or
we do. Yeah. We typically only had law school interns, but I think we're taking some college interns now. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah, that would be great. Cause I really want to see a resurgence of, and one great thing about America still kind of is you can kind of get some victories in the courts sometimes. And so it would be great to see you guys take up the mantle of the ACLU was never perfect, but a lot of what they did really was good. And so I'd like for you guys to fill that gap, and hopefully you'll be a big part of that. So
thank you so much.
There you have it. I'd like to thank Jenin Younes for her time and for her work over the past couple of years, especially on the COVID tyranny And I really thank everyone also at the new Civil Liberties Alliance, where Jenin is litigation counsel. I think they're a really promising organization. I hope they continue to grow and be what, a good ACLU could have been, should have been, maybe was at one point. Links to Jenin's writing, some other stuff we talked about, is up at decentralizedrevolution.com/67. Thanks to Dave vs. Goliath for all the music you hear on Decentralized Revolution. And thanks to everyone who subscribes to our email list and who gives to Mises PAC over at takehumanaction.com, and everyone who shares, rates, reviews, and subscribes to Decentralized Revolution. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.